Hi everyone, it's Ken Rakowski from Mentzel, and this is the Mentzel mentoring session, which we do once a week. I know it looks a little different because she's over here. Sandy is next to me. And the reason why Sandy Grigsby is here is because she is a huge fan of Dr. Amen. And she's probably gonna have a lot of questions that maybe I might skip over. So she is there to make sure we get deep into what's going on here. I'm honored to have Dr. Amen join us. He spent some time with the Mentzel community about 10 years ago when we were meeting in Santa Monica, California. And at that point, he was really getting going on the whole brain X-ray, brain scan. If I remember back then, Dr. Amen, you were focusing on, I think it was people that were incarcerated. It was people in prison and football players, if I remember correctly, which was kind of an interesting duality you were living in. And you were really starting to perfect the direction you're going in. A decade later, now you become the world expert. You are it. I think you have 12 books that you've written, correct?
40.
40.
Just means I'm old. I've been doing it a long time.
40 books. Damn. Okay, 40 books. And you are here as our expert today. And thank you very much for sharing time with us.
My pleasure.
All right, so let's start. You just want to dive into something? You got something? Because I'm ready to go.
Go.
Okay.
I do.
Wait, hang on, guys. Hang on. Everyone's ready to go. Let me ask the very simple question. That is, you came from the psychiatry direction. When did you start to see it was flawed?
So before I went to medical school, I was an X-ray technician. I was an infantry medic and then an X-ray technician. And our professors used to always say, how do you know unless you look? And when I went to medical school, someone I loved tried to kill herself. And I took her to see a wonderful psychiatrist. And I came to realize if he helped her, it wouldn't just help her. It would help everybody in her life, including her children and grandchildren years later. So I fell in love with psychiatry because I realized it can change generations of people. But I fell in love with the only medical specialty that never looks at the organ it treats. And I knew back then it was wrong. And I pushed my professors, we should look, why don't we look? That, you know, many years ago, psychiatry and neurology got divorced. And it was a bad divorce. Neurology got the brain, psychiatry got the mind, and psychiatry, quite frankly, got gypped because the brain creates the mind. And if your brain's not right, your mind's not right. So anyways, fast forward to about 10 years being a psychiatrist, I started looking at the brain with a study called quantitative EEG, changed everything I did. And then 3 years later, I ordered my first SPECT scan in 1991. And I've just been obsessed since then. And now we've built the world's largest database of brain scans related to behavior. We've done about 160,000 scans on people from 150 countries. So, but psychiatry by and large still hasn't changed. They make diagnoses based on symptom clusters with no biological data. And it's why as a profession, we're diminished. We diminish ourselves. And it's like my wife, speaking of Tana, she almost canceled her first date with me when she found out I was a psychiatrist. She's a neurosurgical ICU nurse. And she's like, oh no, they're crazy and I don't want to be analyzed. So I am crazy, but she needed to be analyzed.
And you did a brain scan on her. Another quick question. We're going to open it up for everyone. If you have a question like Adam has already, put it inside the chat and we'll unmute you and bring you on. If this has such a dramatic effect, the way you do things, and you do see the healing opportunities inside the brain scans and then how to diagnose somebody, I'm still a bit puzzled on why insurance does not cover what you do at your clinics.
Well, they cover a lot of what we do at our clinics, right? They cover our evaluations. They just don't cover the scans. And so you just have to understand how Wall Street works. That insurance companies are businesses that have investors that are looking for quarterly profit. And investing in a scan will give you lifelong benefits, but there's a cost upfront to that. And in the early 90s, when I just started imaging, most insurance companies actually covered it. But it's right at that cusp where managed care took over medicine. And where when I was trained, I basically had an hour or two every week with my patients, and that was covered by insurance. But as the early 90s came about and managed care came into medicine, they went, oh, we can do therapy, not with the most highly trained people, psychiatrists. We can do it with marriage and family counselors and spend about a quarter of what we'd spend with a psychiatrist. And so psychiatry just changed dramatically to become pharmaceutical reps, that my hour or two a week turned into 15 minutes a month. And psychiatrists started making their income based on not seeing 6 or 8 patients a day, but 40 patients a day. And when that happened, I actually wanted no part of it. And I'm like, look, if you want to see me, you have to pay me. And so that's part of it. The other part of it is if what I'm doing is right, it sort of means what 40,000 psychiatrists are doing is wrong. And when you tell someone they're wrong, generally my experience, they don't say thank you. They go, you're crazy. And I know I'm not crazy. And what I really argue for is you need more biological data before you start drugging people. And, you know, most 9-year-olds sort of get the concept, but many of my colleagues don't.
All right. So let's go after first Adam. Adam, I know you've been eagerly waiting to ask a question. Adam, go for it.
Thank you. So I have an old friend of mine from Stanford that played football there, went on to play for the Raiders, won a Super Bowl ring for them. He has CTE. His name is Mike Dotterer. And apparently his mom's dying wish was for him to see you. He has a disability claim with the Raiders right now. I was just on the phone with him earlier today, and he asked me to ask the following questions. Can you diagnose CTE through a brain scan? And if you can, do you have a treatment protocol? And he asked about Marianne Diamond, and he said something about her talking about things to treat CTE, and he was wondering whether you have a treatment protocol, and also for disability claims, is there any ability to see you for those sorts of claims? So anyway, I think that sort of summarizes my sort of group of questions, but his mom's dying wish was actually to see you, for him to see you.
All right.
So CTE stands for chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's an autopsy diagnosis. We diagnose it once you're dead by slicing your brain, staining the tissue in a specific way, and we can see it. I'm actually friends with Bennett Amalu, who coined the term CTE, and I was a consultant on the movie Concussion. Starting in 1999 was when we did our first NFL player, Brent Boyd, and then it really ramped up in 2007 when we saw Anthony Davis, the Hall of Fame running back from USC. Since then, we've scanned and treated over 300 NFL players. 80% of our players get better. Now, CTE is a specific diagnostic category that's diagnosed by autopsy. What SPECT or some of the other imaging studies will say is you have the chronic effects of traumatic brain injury. So technically it's not CTE. And, you know, if I end up testifying in court, it's like, yeah, we don't really have scans. It'll give you an autopsy diagnosis. Because quite frankly, I don't want my patients to have autopsy diagnoses. You know, Dr. Amalo deals with the dead. I'm trying to get my patients not to kill themselves or not to be dead. And, but the scans will absolutely show the level of chronic damage. You know, is it damage to the frontal lobes? Is it damage to the temporal lobes? Is it damage to their cerebellum? All of those tend to be hurt in our football group. Not everybody. Some people just have really hardy brains. Many of them do not.
But the process, There you go.
The plan we did with them is we put all of them on a very special multiple vitamin that was really high in B6, B12, folate, and vitamin D. We then put them on high dose, high quality fish oil to decrease some of the inflammation in the brain. And then we put them on a supplement I created called Brain and Memory Power Boost that actually works on repairing the brain in 6 different ways. And then we taught them about brain health. Marijuana is not going green. You have to lose weight. Half of our NFL players were obese, not big boned. Their waist to height ratio, which is the best way to measure it in athletes, was way too big. And I published 3 studies, one on NFL players, that show as your weight goes up, the size and function of your brain goes down. And I'm just about ready to publish a new study in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease that there is virtually a linear correlation. Healthy weight, overweight, obese, morbidly obese. And in a country where 72% of us are overweight, 42% of us are obese, this should horrify all of us for what's coming down the line as far as medical costs in our society. And so we had an NFL weight loss group, and we often would put our players in hyperbaric chambers. So Joe Namath, one of my favorite players, and he talks about this publicly, had a really terrible brain, and he did 40 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen, and it was better. And so, like many of our players, they're very coachable. He did 40 more sessions, and it was better still. And then he did 40 more sessions, so a total of 120 sessions. His brain is normal. And now you see him on TV, and he's doing marketing for certain companies. I'm just so proud.
Yes, fast. We're actually getting in shape. He's doing the actual things to get in shape. So it correlates on what you're saying. So, but we want to go back to Adam's question. Adam, are you asking for your friend to get an appointment? Is that your goal also, Adam?
Well, no, I mean, he also was just curious if he has a disability claim, are those sorts of things, covered to go to somebody like you? I mean, would that be the type of thing that he actually could, as part of his claim, do?
Well, his attorney should send it to us.
Should send it, okay.
So, Stuckey, Stuckey, is a former NFL player. I think he was a New England Patriot, but he's an attorney that deals with a lot of NFL claims, and he sends us a lot of patients to standards. Okay. But it's not our primary job is getting people well. It's not hanging out with attorneys.
And then the other question he had was, what about what Marianne Diamond had talked about? I guess she had talked about nutrition, exercise, activities, something like that. So I guess it's.
I love Marianne Diamond. I think she actually died recently. Okay. And she was an anatomist at UC Berkeley. But she was one of the original pioneers on this concept of neuroplasticity, that no matter how old you are, that your brain can continue to make new connections if you put it in a healing environment. And unfortunately, with what's going on with the pandemic, this is not a healing environment. When you isolate people, the brain actually starts to disconnect itself. And I'm just horrified by I call it pandemic squared. The next pandemic that's coming is a mental health and addiction pandemic, secondary to the isolation and loss people are feeling. But if he engages in new learning, so that would be something Marianne Diamond would espouse, the right nutrition, which is basically high fat diet, high quality fat diet, right? So it's not movie popcorn, that it will have a positive effect on his brain. No question about that.
Adam, thank you very much. Sandy?
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Amon. So my question, I have 2 questions actually. First, Can anyone, or do you recommend anyone to get their brain scanned, or is there something specific that people would go in for? Meaning, if I were to go in to get my brain scanned, what kind of benefits would come out of it? And then the second question is, what are the common things that you find when you scan people's brains?
So, how do I answer this? When I met Tana, for example, I really wanted to know if I wanted to fall in love with her. So 2.5 weeks later, I scanned her. And she said that was like the most unusual line, that you wanted to see that part of my body naked before anything else. So if you date any of my children for more than 4 months, I'm scanning you because I want to know. About 20% of the people who come to see us, they don't have anything wrong. They just want to go, well, how am I doing? You know, maybe I have a parent that has Alzheimer's disease. I don't want to get it. Or they really get the concept success starts with a healthy brain. Mm-hmm. I got to scan Tony Robbins, and he said it publicly. You know, he had mercury poisoning and he's having trouble remembering things. And we did a Facebook Live together, and I'm like, you know, you teach the software of success, but there's hardware that has to work right in order to run the programs you teach. And it was really fun for me. So yes, anybody can call and make an appointment, and brain health is one of our categories. And what would you learn? Well, you would learn about the health of your brain. And SPEC basically tells us 3 things: good activity, too little or too much. And then our job is to balance it. Now, we always take a really detailed history because we want to know what you're struggling with. And if you're not, the benefit is you fall in love with your brain. So it's a concept I call brain envy. Freud was wrong. Penis envy is not the cause of anybody's problem. I've not seen it once in 40 years. But people don't care about their brains. Why? I mean, I live in Newport Beach. We have more plastic surgeons than almost anywhere besides Beverly Hills. And we care more about our faces, our boobs, our bellies, and our butts than we do our brain. How crazy is that? And it's because we don't see it. So once you see it, you're like, oh, this is really healthy. I'm going to keep doing what I do. Or my brain's not healthy at all. I'm going to get it better. So whatever you see is good news because you have what you have. And if we can uncover it and then make it better, well, how exciting is that? The big lesson I've learned from imaging is, I mean, there's a bunch of them, but if I had to go, number 1, mild traumatic brain injury ruins people's lives, and nobody knows it. You know, that car accident when you were 3 and you were thrown from a vehicle, that actually may change the trajectory of your life. Falling down a flight of stairs, playing football, hitting soccer balls with your head. You know, the brain is soft and the skull is hard. And my wife, you know, and I asked her, because I could see a head injury on her scan. And she goes, oh, no, I never had one. Now, she's a neurosurgical ICU nurse. So her idea is I had to have lost consciousness for a month in order for me to have a bad brain injury. But I saw it. And so I pushed. Ever fall out of a tree, off a fence, dove into a shallow pool, in a car accident, concussions, playing sports? No, no, no. And she goes, and it always happens like this. Oh, I'm sorry, I lied to you. I'm like, what? She said, I was 25 and in a car with my sister going 75 miles an hour. My sister fell asleep at the wheel, flipped the car 3 times. The car landed on its roof. It was only I lived because I had my seat back. But I didn't lose consciousness and walked away. And she's the one that put it together. She goes, oh, that's sort of like shaken baby syndrome. Mm-hmm. And whiplash injuries, in many ways, are worse than shaken baby syndromes that we see can, you know, ruin a baby's life. And those whiplash injuries, even when you don't lose consciousness, can have a lasting impact. And so undiagnosed brain injuries are just a major cause of
What
psychiatric.
you're saying is the commonality of people that you see are head injuries that they weren't even aware of. That's the commonality of everything you see across the board.
40%.
40%.
The other thing that I had no idea as a psychiatrist is you really shouldn't breathe toxic air. That firefighters often as a group have damaged brains. That things like Lyme disease can damage the brain. I'm actually really worried about COVID-19. I think we're going to have a COVID epidemic of cognitive and emotional problems, and a lot of the asymptomatic people. And that's why the COVID parties people are having, I'm completely not a fan. I just think that's not smart at all. I don't want it. I mean, if I get it, I'm going to deal with it, but it's not something I'm going to go looking for.
No, don't look for that. Again, guys, you have a question, Dr. Amen is here. Put it inside the chat. Let's go to Harry. Harry, I'm going to go after your question. I've unmuted you. Go for it, Harry.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dr. Amen. I am a big fan. I just quickly want to say that, like Ken and Sandy, my wife loves you and introduced me to your work. I don't know what that says about us men that are wives and girlfriends love you and want you to check.
That's a lot about you.
Yeah, you're a hit. You're a hit.
It's
So,
all about the brain. Come on.
so I'll try and be brief. I've been fascinated with neurology since I was very young. I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome, which is very misunderstood, and worked with Dr. Cummings at City of Hope. But I've been studying it, and I'm interested in it because of AI and a lot of other reasons. But I came across a book called On Intelligence. I wanted to know if you were familiar with it, by Jeff Hawkins, because this is all over my head, but he was the first one. He added time to the equation that, again, I know what about MRIs and fMRIs, but I was wondering if you were familiar with his work, because due to the ADHD and the OCD that we can happen, I've been trying to learn as much as I can about that. And his work was, I think, different than anybody else I had read. Do you know anything about that part of the process with the brain, not just the neurons, but the time it takes for these interactions to happen? And
it's a really interesting question. And I love David Cummings. David and I used to speak at conferences together, and his genetic work was really seminal. And Tourette's, as you said, a lot of people don't know that, but it often goes with ADD and OCD. And funny story, I actually got to speak to the National Canadian Tourette Foundation. And I'm in a room with 400 people with Tourette's. And so for those people who don't know, Tourette's is a tic disorder where people have both motor and vocal tics. So motor tics, you might shrug or, crack your neck a lot, or just move some part of your body because it just feels like you have to move it, and you'll make vocalizations. And they have this one thing called corporalalia, which is involuntary swearing. And so I'm doing this lecture, and all of a sudden someone blurts out F you, and which just horrified me. No one had said that to me since my first wife. But, I'm like, because I'm also a child psychiatrist, just ignore bad behavior. And then like 3 minutes, he did it again. And then 3 minutes later, he did it again. And I couldn't stand it. And I'm like, is that a tick, or don't you like the lecture?
And there's a difference between simple and complex.
Absolutely.
Right?
And I actually have a grandson with Tourette's. So I always say I know more about this than I want to. And from a timing perspective, it's the cerebellum. So the cerebellum is often involved in ADHD, it's involved in autism, it's clearly involved in Tourette's, where it's either underdeveloped or not processing quickly enough. And that's why my recommendation for so many of my patients is table tennis. because it actually activates the cerebellum. I mean, yes, you can dance, you could play tennis, but I love table tennis. I'm actually working with the American Olympic Table Tennis Committee because I just find that's the sport that you have to get your eyes, hands, and feet all working together while you think about this spin on the ball. It's a great cerebellar exercise. The other thing, gluten, interestingly, is responsible for 40% of cerebellar disorders. That the cerebellum is very sensitive to gluten. So with my grandson, I put him, and I do this with most of my patients, gluten-free, dairy-free, corn-free, soy-free, artificial dyes and sweeteners. Just get rid of all of that because the brain can be very sensitive to those things. And he lives in Oregon. When he came to visit me, I'm like, hey, buddy, how are you doing? I don't like any of the foods. And so we actually spent a week together, and I said, hey, our goal before you go home, 20 foods you love that love you back. And we're now at 75 foods he loves that loves him back. So diet is a very important part of getting these complex psychiatric issues better.
You said it was about 30% just on the repair side, right? 30% diet attributes to, or is it higher?
I think it's at least 30%.
At least 30%.
Yeah.
It's pretty fascinating what you just said regarding obesity earlier, because as we look at the United States, Australia, the UK, New Zealand, obese societies, and we're going to see that hit now in the next wave of the population getting older, we're going to see it just explode. And I'm wondering, is there a way to turn the clock back? Is it just about losing weight and getting healthy that will fix that, or are we automatically really are heading towards a catastrophe?
Well, we're automatically heading toward the catastrophe unless we can change our society. And the pharmaceutical industry, the food industry, they are just spending so much money to have political influence. I mean, when they're bringing high-level athletes to the White House and giving them fast food, and nobody's like seriously upset about that, and I'm an equal opportunity hater. I'm like, I just hate them all. I'm an independent. And, you know, and I'm like, I never want to actually say anything political because if you're a Democrat, I love you and want to help you. If you're a Republican, I love you and I want to help you. But, you know, there are just some things like that are just so freaking stupid that we just have to call this out. In my new book, The End of Mental Illness, I talk about the evil ruler. And I posted something on it. And I got all this hate from people who support Trump. And I'm like, I wasn't saying that. It's our society, right? Google's going after the mind share of your children. So is Facebook. They're just like Coca-Cola and McDonald's that are going after stomach share. We just need to be so much smarter. But it's not automatic. But this is why I like being connected with Metal. I need high-level people helping me think about how to create the revolution that we desperately need in this country. And it's not just weight. In The End of Mental Illness, I talk about if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it if it's headed to the dark place, you have to prevent or treat the 11 major risk factors that steal your mind. We know what they are. And really high-level thinkers, I think they're in agreement with me that there's never going to be a pill for Alzheimer's disease. There are too many roads to Alzheimer's. There's never going to be a pill that works for everybody with depression. There are too many ways to get depressed. What we need to do is understand the road to disease, the roads to disease, and go after all of them. So for example, Bright Minds is the mnemonic. B is for blood flow. That's why exercise is important. R is retirement and aging, new learning. I is for inflammation. Got to get your gut right. And omega-3 fatty acids right. G is for genetics. H, head trauma. T is toxins. D is diabetes, and so on. It's like, this is the way we're going to change our society. the end of mental illness begins with a revolution in brain health. And Bright Minds is just sort of, one way to get there. But how do we teach this? We have a foundation. We just got a grant for $60,000 to develop a pre-K elementary school curriculum on brain health. I'm like so excited because as Google's going after your children, I'm going to go after them too. But I'm going to go after them in a way that serves their health rather than with gadgets that damage their health.
I love it. Jared, you have the next question. Go for it.
Yeah, well, part of my question was the Tourette syndrome thing and tics, but I got a call actually from the VA while you were answering it, so I apologize. But I was also interested in ADD, dyslexia, and OCD. Do you treat PTSD? Do you work with the VA? And I think TriWest is the external service that's attached to the VA that helps for like external referrals and things like that. But the main thing for me personally was Tourette's, ADD, dyslexia, and OCD, and had lots of head trauma in terms of like stunts and martial arts and getting hit by cars, stuff like that.
So you sound like our typical patient.
Yeah.
On average, people who come to see us have 4.2 diagnoses. They have failed 3.3 providers and 5 medications. That's our average patient. Yes, we work with all of those things. And, I sort of hate the alphabet soup. It's how can we get your brain healthy so you can reach the goals you have for your life. And, I've written books. I wrote a book on ADD, Healing ADD, sold 650,000 copies. And I'm like, it's not one thing, it's 7 different things. There's actually a subtype called overfocused ADD. It's sort of where OCD and ADD run together. That's where we often see with Tourette syndrome. I published a huge study on post-traumatic stress disorder showing, we can see evidence of it in the brain. And I like certain treatments to calm it down, but I would never want to treat you unless I could know the underlying biology. And we don't work with insurers. We always give people the super bill so that they can, try to get whatever they can out of their insurance company. I have desperately tried to work with the VA. I went to the highest levels of the VA. We got Lebanon VA to buy a spec camera, but they're just a dinosaur that is hard to move.
Yeah, before I go to Chris, our next question. So we have a lot of members that are outside the United States and incapable at this point in time coming and getting a brain scan. Is there anything we can do right now besides losing weight, getting in shape, but is there more vitamins? Is there a nutritional packet we should be taking? Is there anything you could subscribe or prescribe to us or recommend that we can do right now to be more preventative or to have better brain health?
Well, they can get the end of mental illness or my book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life. So number 1 is fall in love with your brain. Number 2 is start avoiding anything that hurts your brain. So you just have to know the list. Bright Minds really is a great structure for that. If we just took blood flow, anything that decreases blood flow in your body damages your brain. And so caffeine, nicotine, alcohol, high blood pressure, any form of vascular disease, erectile dysfunction, which is actually a form of vascular disease. And then, so avoid things that hurt it and then do things that help it. And so beets, of all things, exercise, oregano, rosemary, cinnamon, ginkgo, have all things shown to increase blood flow to the brain. And so for each of those 11 risk factors, how do you know if you have it? What do you do about it? So brain envy, got to care, avoid things that hurt it, do things that help it. From a supplement standpoint, I think everybody should take a multiple vitamin. We are just deficient as a society in magnesium and choline and vitamin D. Everybody should take fish oil. Everybody, even if you're vegan, I think you should take fish oil because vegan sources are really hard to get enough DHA and EPA. And everyone on this call should know their vitamin D level like you know your blood pressure and work to optimize it. Low vitamin D is associated with higher mortality from COVID-19, as is obesity, as is hypertension. And then it based on your type. So for free, you know, we have our brain health assessment. You can go to brainhealthassessment.com, know which of the 16 brain types you have, and then we'll actually recommend these supplements tend to help this type.
Awesome. Chris, go ahead. Your question?
Yeah. So my wife can do 5 things at once, and I'm just focused on one thing. And yeah, that's a pretty common thing I hear. Is there anything in your scan that says men and women's brains are different?
So I actually published a study on 46,000 scans looking at the difference between male and female brains. I have 3 daughters, 16 nieces, and 5 sisters. So I have been curious about that from the time I was young. And we're not the same species. The females generally have a much healthier brain than males because they drink less, they abuse drugs less, and they don't play football. But the female brain, much more active. I generally can tell if it's a male or a female brain just by looking at it. Much more active in their emotional brain, especially the area of the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is so stinking interesting. It's Greek for seahorse. It's deep on the inside of your temporal lobes. And it's Greek for seahorse because it's shaped like a seahorse. And it's where mood and memory are. And that's why women are at a much higher risk of depression. And why, if you say something that hurts her feelings, she's going to remember it for like 15 years. And it's like, let it go. You said it once, she's heard it like 1,400 times. And so that's why we often want to calm their brain, but then stimulate the guy's brain so he doesn't say stupid things that hurts her feelings.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, can you unmute yourself, please? And you have the next question? There you go, Michael.
Yeah, most of my questions have been answered. But you know, I grew up in a household where, you know, my father and his father were definitely temperamental. Like they could get angry at a fork falling on the floor, and I've noticed that pattern in me, and I've done a lot of work to get past that, like meditation and growth and development work, even plant medicine. I've even, you know, I got hit by a car when I was in the first grade. I chased a ball in the street and got hit by a car, and dealt with a lot of anxiety and shock from that. And as much as I've been able to manage, sometimes it feels like there's a lion chasing me. You know, like it's that fight, flight, or freeze sometimes just like pops up. And I'm better at like getting into the breathing exercises, but sometimes meditation doesn't work. And so I'm wondering if I'm a good candidate for that, because you know, I've always just wanted to kind of get checked out and see what's going on.
Yeah, no, you're the perfect person for us. That, you know, you're really working hard, and it's not working as much as you would like it to work. And I often, whenever we assess somebody, we're always thinking of these 4 big circles. It's, well, what's the biology of that? You know, maybe you inherited the tendency toward that with your grandfather and your father being like that, or it could be the traumatic brain injury that, you know, if I had to guess, your left temporal lobe, probably in the injury, in the accident, got hurt. And whenever I see that, mood instability, irritability, temper problems, dark thoughts, for like no reason, they just like, boom, come out. And if you hurt your frontal lobes, you can have the dark thoughts and then you don't supervise them very well and they come out, which then makes you hate yourself. So there's a biology to the irritability, there's a psychology to it. And I teach my patients not to believe every stupid thing they think. It's really important. I call it killing the ants, the automatic negative thoughts. But there are also these bridges that psychologically, when something happens and we react, we're thinking or feeling something that may be connected to something important in the past. And so whenever that happens, I want you to think of it like being Sherlock Holmes, and then we get to be Dr. Watson. It's like whenever it happens, journal it, and then go, okay, what was I thinking and feeling right at that moment? And then when was the first time I ever had that thought or feeling? And, you know, with an irritable grandfather and an irritable dad, you may go back to when you were 4 and he's getting after you and it's completely not fair. And that may be why you're reacting. So there's a biology to what's happening. There's a psychology. There's also a social circle, which that was modeled behavior for you. And then there's the last circle, which is spiritual, which is, so why do you care? What is your deepest sense of meaning and purpose? And maybe what you want to do is, I don't want to repeat this pattern because my children are so important to me. I don't want them to feel the stress I felt. And so really working in all 4 of those circles becomes the plan for us.
James?
But you'd be perfect to come see us.
James?
Good afternoon, Dr. Raymond. Thank you so much for being with us. I think I actually met you about 10 years ago when you came to Metal. I was going to ask you a very specific question about the condition with my mother, but just before, I just wanted to just reflect the fact that I'm really impressed and fascinated by your holistic overview and understanding of the integral parts of the brain and life from a spiritual, physical, and mental point of view. And as just from a foundational principle in thinking, my mentor actually described that if we don't perceive the true nature of our mind or life, then all our meritorious deeds are just painful austerities. And in some cases, I feel we're just like moving the deck chairs on the Titanic. Unless we get to the kind of the root cause, then focusing on trying to move everything around doesn't really solve the problem. So I'm really convergent with your approach here. So I just want to say that, thank you. So on a specific level, my mother had a stroke and brain aneurysm 8 years ago and is now in assisted living and incapacitated and steadily processing on her profound journey and mission into dementia. Is there anything you could suggest to accommodate, improve, or even reverse this?
Well, I'd certainly be after it full force because it's sort of an emergency. I wrote a book called Memory Rescue. And it's like, if you want to keep your brain healthy or rescue it, if it's headed to the dark place, which clearly hers is, you have to prevent or treat these 11 major risk factors. I've been very impressed with hyperbaric oxygen and its ability to improve blood flow even after a stroke. And so putting her brain in a healing environment, which is really hard in an assisted living facility. And, one of my big beefs with assisted living facilities is they let the residents choose their own food. And what food do you pick if you're headed toward dementia? You're not thinking about your long-term health. You choose foods that are high in simple carbohydrates, and that just accelerates the dementia process. So the isolation, the bad food, the lack of new learning is accelerating this particular process. One thing we haven't talked about today, the N in bright minds, is neurohormone disorders. And if her thyroid's not right, and I don't mean normal, I mean if it's not optimal, or even things like estrogen and progesterone, testosterone, DHEA, insulin, all are just really important for the brain to work right. So I would get a copy of my book, Memory Rescue. I'd also think of getting a copy of Dale Bredesen's book called The End of Alzheimer's. It's excellent. And I think he and I really think in a very similar way that you're not stuck with the brain you have. You can make it better, but you have to put it in a healing environment.
Thank you so much, James. Let's go over to Jason. Jason, you have a question?
Yeah, hi, Doc. Thank you so much. This is a great call. I actually recently had a pretty traumatic head injury in an accident, so this is all very, timely for me. When I got the email, I knew I had to step away from work and talk to you. So aside from resting, which is what the doctor obviously says to do, to take it easy, and sounds like I do want to get a brain scan. Anything else just in the near term, as I definitely don't feel 100% yet, and best way to monitor it as well, like how I should know when I can go back to regular, physical exercise and stuff like that.
So getting a scan will really help to see where you're at. I developed our Brain and Body Power Max. It's on BrainMD. It's one of our supplement systems for my NFL group to repair brain trauma. Now, would never say that on the website because the FTC would not be happy with me. But that's exactly the formula I used with my NFL players, and 80% of them showed improvement. So nutrition is really critical. If you're light sensitive, are you light sensitive since the head trauma?
Yeah, that's why I bought these glasses. I don't know if they work or if it's placebo, but I am, yep.
So there's a syndrome that often comes after traumatic brain injury called the Irlen syndrome, IRLEN. Go to Irlen.com. I have no financial interest in them except I love them. And so many of my patients develop this light sensitivity syndrome. And you have it if you're light sensitive, if you get headaches, if your depth perception feels off, if when you read it triggers headaches or letters blur, move around the page, wearing colored filtered lenses. And it's actually, everybody's different as far as the color they need, just makes a huge difference for them. I have so many great stories about how diagnosing and treating that syndrome just changed people's lives. And then you might also think about hyperbaric oxygen. When I'm trying to, and then one of my docs has a new book out called Concussion Rescue that you might want to pick up as well. He's got a lot of other ideas too. And one thing people don't understand with traumatic brain injury is your pituitary gland, which sits in a vulnerable area of your skull. It's your master hormone gland that it gets jostled and your hormones can all of a sudden be off, whether it's testosterone or DHEA or thyroid, and working to repair them is just absolutely essential in getting well. I've never seen this epidemic of young men and teenage boys with low testosterone. And I think part of it, it's the toxins we put on our body. All of you should download this app called Think Dirty. It's not what you think it is, but you can actually scan all of your personal products and it'll tell you on a scale of 1 to 10 how quickly they're poisoning you, right? We're putting, and now with COVID-19 and you're washing yourself with Lysol, which is just filled with poison. Yes, you're killing COVID-19, but you're also killing your own immune system with it. So really diving into brain health. And then in the end of mental illness, there's a whole chapter on head trauma and what I do to help with my patients.
We're all going down to Think Dirty, the app right now. So Doc, I'm just on more of the professional side of what you're doing. So if you have this whole mission to really dive deep into the brain and you've done incredible work, but you also have the industry that sees you as being something that not just being disruptive, but actually being damaging. Is it difficult for you to be speaking within your realm of psychiatrists or mental health workers? Do they shun you, or do they bring you in and kind of say, you know, listen to some of the stuff he's saying, but not all of it? How do they see you?
Well, it depends on who's looking. So
Dave Asprey and those guys love you.
The integrative medicine group, I'm a teacher, I'm revered, I win awards. The traditional psychiatric group think I'm the devil. It just depends. We've had 15,000 medical and mental health practitioners refer to us. So clearly not everybody hates me. And we've seen over 100,000 patients, with our biggest referral source being our own patients. So if I'm right, it means they're wrong. And unfortunately, history is going to prove them wrong. Making diagnoses based on symptom clusters with no biological data is insane. It is the emperor that really doesn't have clothes.
So here, I believe, will probably be your first question ever from an opera singer. I'm just guessing, maybe. Stephen?
Yes, thank you. Hey, Dr. Daniel Amen, thank you so much for being here. I am a voice teacher and an opera singer, and I have worked with people that have strokes and autism, and I taught autistic twins for a year. And we were able to, by teaching them to sing, improve their speech patterns, their ability to communicate, all these different types of things. And also, I guess years ago in 1920 at Harvard, they did a study that shows that if you sing on a consistent basis, you actually live longer, and it improves the brain activity. And they've been able to recently connect that to something called the vagus nerve, which is, some people call it the happiness nerve. You can get it by laughing more, smiling more, deep breathing more, singing. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I actually wrote about it in my book, Change Your Brain, Change Your Life, that singing does so many good things for you. It activates your cerebellum, which we talked about earlier, but music and rhythm activate your temporal lobes, which are involved in both receptive and expressive language. And so, of course, it depends on what you sing as far as you're going to be happy or sad. So when I was growing up and I was a teenager in the 60s, I loved Cat Stevens. I could, and I think I've written, you know, one of the 40 books just listening to his song, Father and Son, which I just love that song so much.
Great song.
And when I put it on now, my wife starts screaming at me because she wasn't a teenager in the 60s. She was just a little girl when her uncle, who also liked Cat Stevens, was a heroin addict, and he scared her. So music triggers emotion, and it can trigger really great emotion, or it can trigger painful emotions. And so where you go with it, when, you know, we talked about irritability earlier, is that when my patients get anxious or irritable, I want them to go to a playlist that they design that makes them happy or relaxed, to change their state. Singing can change your emotional state. So you have to be careful what you listen. So Tana's not going to a Cat Stevens playlist. But, you know, she'll pick her own. And I think developing voice helps you develop breath. And breath work is really the foundation of most meditative practices.
Good question, Stephen. Our last question, let's go to Nor. Nor, you have the last question? Unmute yourself.
Dr. Amen, I just wanted to know if fluoride calcifies the pineal gland.
If what?
Fluoride calcifies the pineal gland.
Oh, interesting. You know, a lot of my integrative medicine colleagues are not fans of fluoride, and they think it's actually toxic. to the brain. I don't know the answer to the question. I wish I did.
It's that simple. Okay, so more research on that. So before we go, I always like to ask an ask. We have a community of about 1,000 of people that have a lot of access and influence and the ability to inform and educate. How can we help you? If you could ask for something from us, what would you like to ask for?
Well, you know, as I finish,
Think big. Think big.
This is big. I was actually invited to the White House, and they wanted, I'm part of a group called Mental Health Leaders of Faith. And they go, what's your big idea? When I wrote The End of Mental Illness, it just became crystal clear to me, the end of mental illness will begin with a revolution in brain health. And, you know, I'm an Army veteran, I'm a physician, a psychiatrist, a troublemaker. I don't know how to create revolutions. But maybe somebody at Metal knows how to create revolutions. And that's what I want to do. It's how I want to spend the rest of my life, is really working on this revolution. So anything you can do that is helpful to that mission, I would just be so grateful.
Well, I noticed that you constantly are educating. Your Instagram is full of not just posts, but just lives and videos. This is not just a passion, this is a purpose for you. This is your purpose. And you and your wife, it seems like your life has totally changed the minute you found your soulmate, because she has made you, am I wrong? I mean, come on, you're.
Well, after she stopped torturing me about 1.5 years into it, it's been great since then.
What do you mean by that, torturing you?
Oh, she'd come and go, and I'm just so grateful for my psychiatric training. Once she committed, you know, she's all in. And she actually has a new book coming out, and it explains why. It's called The Relentless Courage of a Scared Child. Coming out January 5th. And I'm just so proud of her. But
Dr. Amen?
Being connected to her really has made my life much happier.
Healthy relationships could fix the brain or help the brain too.
Yes, and unhealthy ones damage it. So the one question to ask yourself if you were going to marry someone is, can I live with this person in a pandemic?
Can I live with you in a pandemic?
Yes.
How about you?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I will propose to her then. Dr. Daniel Amen, thank you so much for sharing time with us and give us your insight. Please go off and buy one of the 40 or all the 40 books. And everyone unmute yourself and thank Dr. Amen for being with us.
Thank you.
Dr. Amen,
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Amen.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doc. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Rock.
Bye.